So today I wanted to talk a bit about the movie Birds of Prey. As with all my reviews, we will be getting into spoilers here, so just be warned about that. Anyway, this is a DC superhero film starring Margot Robbie as Harley Quinn, a role she was initially cast in the infamously terrible Suicide Squad, which this film is not necessarily a sequel to. In fact, I'd go so far as to say that this movie feels like a focused rebuttal to the many failures of that film. Much like Suicide Squad, the plot revolves around Harley teaming up with a ensemble cast of morally gray characters to defeat a greater evil, but deviates almost immediately by cutting the Joker out of the picture, allowing Harley to have her own agency, and reducing the scope of this movie's conflict to something less lofty and world-changing than many other DC films, which I think is to this movie's advantage. It gets to succeed on the small scale in a way similar to how Ant-Man or Spider-Man Homecoming succeeded as being low-key films within the MCU, as well as allowing for more time to be spent on developing these characters rather than progressing apocalyptic events. Going into the film, I was hoping for a fun and freewheeling action flick, similar to the most recent Charlie's Angels, but with a bit more of a chaotic edge to it. And it was encouraging to hear that this film was somewhat of a passion project for Margot Robbie, who seems to really enjoy this role and apparently pitched the film herself. And I'm pleased to report that I basically got what I wanted out of this film. The action sequences are fun, the characters are engaging and given enough time to really breathe and develop, and there's just enough big Deadpool energy to keep things genuinely exciting without being obnoxious. And I genuinely think it's the best DC film I have seen to date. Like, I really love Aquaman, but that movie is only fun because it's an entire ocean of dumb bitch juice sprinkled on Jason Momoa's abs. By comparison, Birds of Prey is just a lot smarter and a lot less reliant on immersion-breaking CG effects, and also more characters that I'm actively invested in. Besides Harley, we're also dealing with Black Canary, Huntress, Renee Montoya, and Cassandra Cain, who fill out the sort of girl gang that eventually forms towards the end of the movie. For most of the film's runtime, we see all of these characters slowly entangle themselves in the criminal dealings of the movie's antagonist, Black Mask. And so it feels very natural when all of these characters start slowly coming together, rather than forcefully assembled into a unit like in Suicide Squad. And importantly, it allows the characters to establish some sort of rapport or dynamic before joining together, because many of them are not on the same side at all at the beginning of this film. Now, one of the things that I wasn't aware of going into this was the presence of Ewan McGregor, who plays the main antagonist, Black Mask. Generally, he is an actor that I enjoy seeing in pretty much anything, but was a really good fit for this role in particular because of how the writers allow the character to change from the beginning of the film to the end, starting off as an affable, if not demanding, club owner, and progressing into something much more unhinged and disturbing. I'm not under the impression that he takes very many villain roles, and initially this character has a very Trainspotting-esque dirty charm to him, but McGregor lets the character slowly break down and become increasingly uncomfortable in a way that I think a less talented actor would have failed to sell. Another performance that I really liked was Mary Elizabeth Winstead as Huntress, a character who has been trained from adolescence to be a just stone-cold assassin, but in this iteration lacks a lot of social skills because she has just spent so much of her time in isolation training, and so she has to bounce between being a certifiable badass that the rest of the gang are hugely impressed with, while also being just kind of out of her element whenever she has to talk to people. Now, unfortunately, her character is also central to one of the big problems I have with this movie, which is that it jumps around in time at several places in a way that felt kind of unnecessary. Like, we have to dead stop to do some flashbacks to explain her, even though a lot of it crosses over with flashbacks that we had earlier on in the film. Again, all of these character arcs are pretty well interwoven. The movie itself starts off in the middle of things before going backwards in time to explain how we got here, and happens again right around the time that Harley Quinn breaks into the police station. And it makes me wonder what the difference in momentum was between doing these cuts and just playing things linearly, because I don't think that they would have lost a lot of steam. This movie does kind of go hard through most of its runtime. But compared to other DC films, this feels like a lesser sin, particularly because they've aced so many other components to this film. Now, I heard some criticisms of this film that didn't really sit with me or didn't feel like they translated to my experience with this film, particularly some people feeling like it was trying too hard to be a female version of Deadpool. Both Harley Quinn and Wade Wilson are textbook chaotic neutral characters, and both were created to be zany counterpoints to the dark and brooding 90s era of comic book superheroes. But where this film feels very different from the Deadpool movies to me is in the perspective. In the Deadpool movies, you are getting everything through the eyes of Deadpool, who is an admittedly unreliable narrator, and so the movie skews closer to his manic perception of reality than any of the other characters. Whereas in Birds of Prey, Harley is certainly an oddball character in her own world, but it's a world that is presented with other perspectives. The closest it really feels to the way Deadpool rolls is in the moment where Harley, having been beat up and possibly tortured, imagines a musical scenario where she is singing Diamonds Are a Girl's Best Friend. And if there had been many more surreal moments like that, or if the animations from the beginning of the film had crept back into the movie, then maybe I would have felt the comparison a bit stronger. So when I say that this movie does have some big Deadpool energy, it's mostly in that it doesn't take itself seriously and its action scenes fucking rip. Like, I was talking to my cousin after seeing this, and we were geeking out a bit about the set piece towards the end of the film where they are fighting inside of the funhouse, which lent itself to some really unique stunts and action sequences. Like when Huntress is just riding on top of this one dude and stabbing him to death in a slide, or all of the characters fighting countless goons on this rotating carousel. Like, everything in that section felt really fresh, really fun, and just I'm sad that Black Canary didn't get to use her powers very prominently in the film until the very end, but they're shown to be kind of OP, so I guess that's okay. Another criticism that I was hearing was people saying that it was pandering a little too hard to women, which is generally not a problem. Like, if you're annoyed that women are working together and supporting each other in a movie, you should probably find better things to give a shit about. Oh, they play a dark version of Barracuda. They're playing songs by women. Oh no! I generally like seeing characters learn to get along with one another and establish good dynamics, and this movie does that. So yeah, I had a good time with Birds of Prey. And as a final note, you don't really need to see Suicide Squad to enjoy this film. It's its own thing. If you liked what you heard here, I'm going to link some of my other movie reviews down below, as well as my anime and music reviews. As always, thanks for listening to my cruddy opinions. Ciao.